You could soon need to be 21 to buy cigarettes in Illinois, and tax talk continues at the State House. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoenburg from the State Journal-Register. The legislature is in session. Things are happening. We have a new panelist today and a returning panelist today to talk about these things. Jerry Nowicki is with us. He is a reporter with Capitol News Illinois. Welcome to your inaugural voyage.
Thanks for having me.
And Brian Mackey is back. He is State House reporter for NPR Illinois.
Good to be with you as always, Bernie.
Thanks. First of all, and before we get to these issues, I just want to say welcome to Jerry. And you are part of a team that has been hired and started working in January at the State House to add to what was the dwindling press corps. And you've added, is it 3 full-time reporters, an intern, and an editor?
Yep.
And it's the funded by the and overseen by the Illinois Press Foundation. With a grant also from the McCormick Foundation. Just describe what you do and who gets your work.
So we are a nonprofit funded by grants, like you said, McCormick Foundation and Illinois Press Foundation, and our work goes out to all of the member newspapers of the Illinois Press Association.
Including the State Journal-Register, the Chicago Sun-Times, and papers across the state.
Correct. So as small as 300 circulation, as high as the Sun-Times, and basically, we've been publishing over 250 papers, and the combined circulation of them is 1.5 million.
Okay, it's just in an age where, as we know, the press room has shrunk over the years. It's nice to have some extra people covering stories that might otherwise not get covered. So thanks for being there.
It's good to be joined in such esteemed company.
Yeah, well, there we go. Okay.
Yeah, I can even put a finer point on it.
Yeah.
You have a lot of news organizations. Unfortunately, the State Journal-Register is not one of them. They still have a State House reporter, but as of right now, newspapers from the Bloomington Panagraph, Decatur paper, St. Louis Post-Dispatch, Chicago Sun-Times, Rockford Register-Star, Chicago Tribune even have all pulled back on their having in-person State House coverage, which has been a real disappointment and a real problem, I think, for the people of Illinois getting informed about their government. So it's nice to see some action to try and improve the size of the State House press.
And I will briefly say that this is from what I've seen, and our editors have used many of your stories, very legitimate coverage of State House issues, straightforward, filling gaps, like I say, but not with an agenda. And there are some agenda-driven groups out there. One of them, there's a guy named Dan Proft, who runs a Republican political committee that supports candidates, and he puts out papers and websites, 29 of them at last count, all over the state, including the Sangamon Sun and the Chambana Sun. And they just use them with reporters in remote locations, often in other states or countries, I think, to just get the word out that Democrats are bad, Republicans are good, or taxes are bad, and here's why your legislators are wasting your money, instead of actual on-the-scene reporting with both sides in a story. So thank you for being straight and giving more reporters more newspapers the opportunity to carry that kind of news.
We're happy to do it.
On we go. So Tobacco 21, I mentioned it as the show opened that it will soon likely be the law in Illinois that you'll have to be 21 instead of 18 to buy cigarettes. Brian, this is something that was passed before under Governor Rauner, who thought this would hurt business, especially in convenience stores near the edges of the state, the borders, and also may not stop kids from smoking anyway, but that's certainly not the way the House and Senate have now voted.
It is, and I think it was striking the difference particularly in the House vote, the number of people who voted for this versus what it was last year. I think it got just barely squeaked by. You need 60 votes to pass something in the House. It got, I think, 61 or a little more than that last year. This year it was up over 80. And Jim Durkin, the House Republican leader, was one of the people who switched his vote. He made a little speech about how he voted against this last time, but he had changed his mind. He had been convinced, and he said he did some reading and some research, and it was his own daughter, who is 17, and said that it's just gone out of control with young people using these vaping products, which apparently you can use in the school bathroom. There's no really residual smoke. It just smells like an air freshener or something. So it's much easier to do that without getting caught than it might have been a generation ago.
With real cigarettes.
Yeah, exactly. and that this is viewed as a gateway. That there's evidence that young people who start with this progress to cigarettes or other more harmful tobacco products. But there are even questions about these products. I mean, they contain nicotine. It says that in big letters, which is an addictive chemical. And I've seen other ingredients or share properties with antifreeze and things like that. So there are a lot of questions about the health effects of this. And so lawmakers say that this is a way to try and keep kids from picking up a habit.
Right, and Jerry, with this governor, I guess we're guessing, and the way I said it, it's likely that he's going to be for this bill and not do what Governor Rauner did.
Right. So my colleague Rebecca Anzel is out there covering this right now as I'm sitting here. So she had talked to the governor, and he said through a spokesperson they look forward to reviewing it. So less than 100% statement there, but Senate President Cullerton really seems to think that the governor will sign it, and most people think the governor will sign it. So
yeah,
seems like.
Which I would just like to say, then why is he reviewing it? This is an issue that's been out there. This is a frustration.
Well, I think it makes
had.
sense for a governor to say
Mm.
we're going to, in case any new language is in there, or if
Okay.
there's anybody that has a last-minute concern, I think it's fair.
You were very generous, Bernie. And we are still in the young days of the Pritzker administration. But Governor Rauner did this, Governor Quinn did this, Governor Blagojevich did this. This is not a new issue. Mm-hmm. It's a simple thing to explain. This does not involve the tax code or energy transfer
But it
payments
doesn't
or anything.
involve a lot of businesses.
Yeah, but it's now it's age 18. It's going to be age 21. It's a simple thing, and he also wouldn't say where he stood last year when Governor Rauner vetoed this. So this is something he's long been coy about. But you've got to imagine that the Democrats mostly Democrats who are pushing this, and the Lung Association and other groups like that could almost dare him to veto it. I mean, is he really going to stand with the tobacco companies? But there is a wrinkle here, and that's that one of the many pieces of Scotch tape he's using to hold the state budget together includes a new tax on these vaping products, which are currently not taxed like cigarettes. They would be under this legislation. And
not under the one that just passed, under
excuse
tax
me,
legislation.
Under his budget
Right,
proposal. Thank you. Yes.
It would take separate legislation for that.
If legislators take his suggestion for the budget,
Right.
then you're going to have a new tax on these vaping products. And if young people are really a big part of this market, well, then that does cut into that revenue. Yeah. I mean, I suspect he would not make that crass a decision about public health, but I do think it's interesting that he is being coy about this is not like a surprise out of left field issue. It's been something that's out there for a while.
I would just like to, in a broad perspective, I've been covering the legislature for some decades now, and it was, I don't know, has it been 20 years? The Clean Indoor Air Act, which banned smoking inside of buildings, was a horribly difficult thing to pass. It took years and years and years of debate, but finally,
it's only been about 10 years now.
Yeah, and I know. And U.S. Senator Dick Durbin from Springfield was the impetus in Congress when he was in the House, I believe, to try to get smoking banned on airplanes. And the flight attendants were with him. And then it went to buildings in Illinois, or public places first, then all indoor air and restaurants. We all remember, I think, we all are old enough, it was not that long ago. You could go to a restaurant, there was a smoking section, and somehow they didn't have a wall between that section and the rest.
Right.
But it's now just more normal to do this. And President Cullerton, John Cullerton of the Senate, has been for things like this all along. He was a big advocate of the seatbelt law, which also took a long time to pass and is now used by most people. Motorcycle helmets, we're not there yet. And I'm not sure that's ever going to happen in Illinois with the strong motorcycle lobby that likes the freedom not to have to wear a helmet for safety.
I mean, I have said to people, we deal with a lot of very important legislation that we cover, billions of dollars being expended, people's lives at stake in terms of criminal justice and healthcare policy. But I think for me personally, the smoking ban, as somebody who does not smoke and really gets my eyes get watery, I can't stand it. I used to avoid a lot of restaurants just because if they didn't have a good division. That is probably one of the single most impactful pieces of legislation that's passed during my lifetime.
Very interesting.
So, yeah.
Well, and we'll see what the governor does. My guess is this is big enough. If he decides to do it, it will not be a quiet signing ceremony. It'll probably be in a big place with a lot of advocates who can, be happy and get the pens.
And if he doesn't, it seems like they got the votes to override him. So,
Which is very interesting. And yeah, what you said about
If
Representative Durkin.
If he makes up his mind about this issue.
Well, one of the other big issues on the plate, which is an overarching issue, is that Governor Pritzker, we know, wants to have what he calls a fair tax, what opponents call a jobs tax, but he wants the income tax in Illinois not to be flat anymore, but to be progressive so that higher income people pay more. That will take a constitutional amendment. He has proposed now brackets finally in a couple weeks ago in a press conference to say who would pay the most, and it's, top level is if you make $1 million, and then all of your income would be at the highest bracket, which I think is 7.95. So Jerry, the governor, was in Chicago this week, although some of us were able to listen to this through the wonders of the internet, and he introduced a fair tax calculator so people can plug in certain items from their tax return or what they think their income is and dependents, and see how they would fare under the fair tax, because he's fighting people who are dead set against this and say it will drive jobs and job creators from the state.
yeah, so I've fiddled around with the calculator, and it turns out about $253,000 is what you have to make for your tax bill to be $1 more expensive than it would under the current rate of 4.95 on all income. But then after that is when it really gets steeper.
Right, for the people who make more than $250,000 a
Right.
year.
So in the middle or in the lower brackets, the tax savings is even Governor Pritzker said is pretty modest. There's up to a couple $100 here or there, but he's also got some child tax credits
Right,
for
like $100
families.
per dependent,
Yeah,
I think,
and
increase.
the property tax savings, which is a little bit as well. But it is an interesting calculator. You can plug in a lot of things into it and see where it goes.
Is that at illinois.gov or what is it?
I think it was illinois.gov/fair tax calculator.
Okay, and Brian, I mean, obviously this is all based on the brackets the governor introduced. The brackets will not be part, I'm guessing, of the constitutional amendment. It will be legislation. Legislation can change. The opponents of this say, oh, he's not going to get enough money from just those rich people. So the legislature, even if not in the first year of a fair tax, which can't come until after the Constitution is changed, and that couldn't happen until 2020 anyway, but the legislature can change those rates. They can dip down into the middle classes and everybody will be hurt. But there's kind of a PR war going on, and this is part of it.
Yeah, and there's an anti-tax think tank out there that, tallied up Pritzker's campaign promises and thought that if he followed through on all of them, it would cost $20 billion. Even Rich Miller, the blogger / newsletter writer who writes for
Capital
Facts,
He is
tallied,
Capital Facts.
Yeah,
yes.
he's viewed as a pretty fair arbiter of these things. He tallied Pritzker's campaign promises at $10 billion, and so this graduated income tax brackets that the governor put out would only raise a little more than $3 billion. So and Republicans can point to other states where, yes, they started out slow and then they raised taxes later on. The counter to that is that Illinois has had very few tax increases over the years. It's been very difficult to raise taxes. Legislators are very averse to it. Yes, yeah. Because the voters in Illinois, in their wisdom, seem to respond to messages that make legislators afraid to vote for tax increases. Although Charlie Wheeler, another frequent guest of this program, has done an analysis and finds that people rarely lose their seats after voting for tax increases. Now, sometimes they're lame ducks, or they leave so that they don't. A lot of the lawmakers particularly the Republicans who voted for the tax increase a couple of years ago, chose to
break the budget impasse.
Yeah, and they chose to leave the legislature rather than face angry voters about that.
So the other counter is they already have the authority to raise taxes now. This doesn't give them tax raising authority. It's just it just allows them to do it in higher amounts to higher income earners. So Pritzker said his other option is either 15% cuts across the board or a 20% tax increase on everyone. So if you frame it that way, the tax decrease to 97% of people is a little bit more palatable.
Yeah. And I know that Governor Pritzker has indicated, and I mean, there have been hints, and then I saw something that said he actually said, I think to, in an investors meeting in New York, that there would be an advertising campaign because he has formed, or he has donated to one of these new groups. They call it dark money groups because they don't have to declare donors. But
Think Big Illinois.
Think Big Illinois is going to be promoting the fair tax as a way to give, most people a tax break, and that's going to be the message. Whereas another group that Greg Bays, former head of the Illinois Manufacturers Association, called Ideas Illinois, they have formed a group that is barraging the internet and probably advertising to come, saying this again is just a tax increase. Illinois is taxed too much. Why don't they just cut spending and not raise taxes on the people who bring jobs to the state? So it's going to be a big battle that will continue.
Excuse me. Go ahead.
The interesting thing is, whenever Pritzker says something in a press conference, as he's speaking, you'll get something from the Illinois GOP, you'll get something from Ideas Illinois, and then immediately following, you'll get a press release from Think Big. Even before the governor's office puts out their press release. So they really are at it.
Isn't
100%.
it quaint, Brian, that in the old newspaper days, you'd have to wait till the morning to see what the news was? Anyway.
I miss those days sometimes. But, and I would just say I think this is going to be a big fight. It's going to last for a year and a half. And it'll be interesting to see when the governors, or at least the governor's allies in Think Big, because that's ostensibly separate from him. It's one of these groups that it's not allowed to coordinate. But
he did put money into it, though.
Yeah, he did admit that. Yeah.
So when they decide to get into the fight, because I know that the Illinois Policy Institute, which is a conservative, anti-tax,
kind of libertarian-ish.
I guess depends on the issue.
Yeah, certainly fiscally conservative.
Yeah, although their director got pretty upset about Governor Rauner's signing of an abortion bill for a libertarian group. That's not a very libertarian stance, but we're getting bogged down. On the fiscal side, yes. And I guess I should correct myself because they make a differentiation. They have an affiliate of the think tank that is another one of these dark money groups called Illinois Policy, used to be Illinois Policy Action. It was making robocalls last weekend. I asked
about the tax?
About the tax.
Okay.
I know there was one targeting State Representative Sue Scherer, who is one of those Democrats who has traditionally had to vote for tax increases and oppose them because it's it's thought of as a more even district. It's not exactly a safe Democratic district, although she's won pretty handily every
safe.
time.
But taking in Decatur and Springfield's east side, but yes.
Right, but she so it was targeting her. The policy, Illinois Policy, not the Institute, would not say which I asked which legislators are you targeting. They just said we're reaching out to our network of hundreds of thousands of members to inform them about this critical issue. But
gotcha.
I mean, the other side is engaging in the fight already. So.
Right, interesting. One big issue hanging out there, as the legislature is supposed to finish its work by the end of May if they are on schedule. The governor wants a capital bill. He wants to get some of these tax questions resolved by then. He wants the legislature to put on the 2020 ballot the graduated income tax. But what about a capital bill? He wants to do that first. But everybody on both sides seems to want roads and bridges and maybe some sort of a revenue increase, which could be a gasoline tax, but we don't know. What's the status of that? Any late word?
I don't know about the status, but I've sat through a couple of the committees where universities are making their wish list, and there's just an astronomical amount of capital needs throughout the state. And they talked about one science building that basically they have to cover their science projects with tarps to prevent the leaky ceilings from ruining them at EIU, I think that was.
Yeah, and I've heard of some meetings just going on at the State House this week where some legislators were talking to their senator about a state park in their area that really needed help, and buildings leaking and things like that. So there's been a lot of deferred maintenance, and that's very expensive.
Yeah,
not to mention just the roads, like part of Lakeshore Drive that buckled a couple weeks ago when a bridge started cracking and they had to shore it up.
And there's a bridge that goes over the what is it, the Des Plaines River, the Joliet River, whichever river goes through Joliet. It's on Interstate 80, and it's this old metal bridge. It kind of makes that sound when you go over it.
My dad refuses to drive on it.
Well, and that may be wise because officials are saying that this thing is could be it's a disaster waiting to happen. I guess local officials have even put up signs warning people
that wasn't
you're
local
going
officials.
at your own risk.
That was, I think that was union groups. That
Was that
paid for
union
those
group? I thought
signs.
it was
think
the mayor.
so.
Okay, but I know that the mayor was also raising a ruckus about this and saying the mayor of Joliet. So this is there's definitely a hunger out there. Politicians love doing ribbon cuttings. But as the question is with everything in Illinois government, how are you going to pay for it?
Speaking of paying for things, one of the other money-raising ideas that Governor Pritzker has introduced is a plastic bag tax, so that you would pay, I think it's a nickel per bag he wants statewide. And already in Chicago, the city of Chicago is charging 7 cents a bag if you get them at a store. Brian, I think you just did a look at this. Was it your story that said maybe this is all too much trouble than it's worth for the $20 million we'll get? Or maybe that was somebody else who was commenting on that.
I don't know that I would say that. It is a very small amount of the overall budget battle, but this is something that environmentalists have wanted for a long time because they say that plastic pollution is just a scourge.
Worldwide.
Yeah, worldwide. And so they would rather see a 10-cent tax because they think that would do a better job of deterring people. And they also don't want the money to go into the state's main checking account, what's called the General Revenue Fund, because they're worried that if legislators get used to having that money, they're not going to be as worried about discouraging the use of plastics. They would rather see the money spent on environmental causes. Then you have the retail merchants, which want businesses that have to stock extra bags, paper bags, or reusable bags to be able to hold back a little bit of the money.
Yeah,
that's in
2 or 3
Chicago. You
cents.
get to keep
Like
2 cents out of the 7 cents.
Right.
And they also want to, if the state law were to take effect, to preempt any other local ordinances about regulating plastics, drinking straws, things like that. And environmentalists think that's not a great idea.
So the environmentalists were actually opposed to it. They spoke in opposition at the Senate Revenue Committee, and it was because it preempts the tax on a bunch of other things. Even newspaper bags and a bunch of other things are preempted from it. So they want it to be more expansive. And I think it's 7 cents. It would be 7 cents for the consumer, right?
It depends on which version. So the one that was in the Senate would have been 7 cents for the consumer. There's one that's been introduced in the House that's 10 cents. As you said, the governor called for 5 cents.
Do we think this is going to happen? Do we have any idea yet?
I mean, it's supermajority Democratic legislature and a Democratic governor. You'd think that if they could get together on this, the question will become, as I said in this story, how do I remember my plastic bags when I go to the store?
Well, there have been some other stories getting around, including that Illinois is losing more high school grads to out-of-state colleges. I think it's like 47%. This is kind of a continuing problem for the state. Is there any way this gets stopped, or any idea of,
It's funny, when I worked at a newspaper in Leroy, Illinois.
Which is somewhere near Bloomington. Is it McLean County?
Near Bloomington, it is McLean County. Governor Rauner came to Leroy High School, and he was being toured, given a tour by the students, and he was asking them where they're from. One of them said Missouri, one of them said Indiana State, one of them was going to UMI.
Oh, you mean where the Leroy kids were going to go?
Yeah, where they were going to go to school, and they're each giving him a different state. And he says, well, you got us pretty much surrounded. And that was 2015, and it seems like things aren't changing.
Yeah, I'm thinking that the 2-year budget impasse was very difficult because colleges and universities got the brunt of that because they didn't get a lot of funding during those 2 years.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think that the uncertainty over whether, at some point during the impasse, universities were one of the hardest hit parts of the state government funding recipients. And full disclosure, my radio station is part of the University of Illinois system. And because of the strength of the University of Illinois, and it gets a lot of research money, it was one of the least affected by the budget impasse. But if you were going to be going to Eastern or Western, where they were laying off teachers and ending programs.
We've just heard of another, more than 100 people that are supposed to be
huge
laid off at Western.
Yeah, and so there's a question: will this university be there in 4 years when I finish? It's certainly during the budget impasse. I don't think that's currently a question. And what interests me about this fight in particular is that when we talk about people are leaving Illinois, because Illinois is one of the few states that has seen modest but consistent population declines in recent years, the a lot of pundits, the Chicago Tribune editorial board, for example, say this is the taxes, the wealthy are going to leave Illinois and that thing. But what we've seen, the actual evidence we've seen, is that it's college kids, as you said this week, and also African Americans leaving the city of Chicago, in part for economic opportunity, also because of the violence perhaps that plagues some neighborhoods there. And so if you actually look at those numbers, it tells a more complete story than the sort of anecdotes about a family that moved away because they were sick of paying property taxes in Winnetka or whatever.
Well, another thing on the universities was a lot of students weren't getting their MAP grants, the Monetary Award Program, which or didn't have access to them.
Right, and that again, that was cut back during the impasse, and that's thousands of kids who otherwise would have gotten some help. There's also a report, there's a continuing teacher shortage in districts across Illinois, Jerry, and that's just a problem. There's another, Governor Rauner had vetoed a bill to raise the minimum pay for teachers to $40,000, saying localities should handle that, but that bill is coming back again. I think Senator Menard is pushing that from.
Yeah, he got it out of the Senate Education Committee. It's been held on either second or third reading. I think they're still waiting. It would put it up to $40,000
over a number of years.
Period
right?
of years. I think the first raise would be to 32. He said that number hasn't been changed since, I think he said like the 70s or 80s
right,
even.
and it was like $11,000.
It was
yeah.
something.
Although nobody pays
livable.
that, and many teachers get more than 40 now. Well, it's a continuing. That's another one where a new administration, a new governor could well act differently because Governor Rauner vetoed the $40,000 the step up to that for teachers back in his day. But teachers' unions were not the favorite of Governor Rauner, to put it lightly. So on we go. Well, that about does it for us this week. We'll continue watching for you, and we hope you continue watching us. Jerry Nowicki, thanks for coming to visit and conversing with us. Brian Mackey, thank you. I'm Bernie Schoenburg, and we'll see you next time on Capitol View.